in one of the chapters in your book, you talk about empathy and being able to have that, and how do we cultivate that? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. And I think just a lot of, again, practice. I mean, there are some skill sets. You can break empathy down to several different components that involve skills. And there's a lot of controversy about whether, can everybody be taught? I'm not going to speculate on who can and can, improve our empathy. But I believe that that's something we can all, with practice, strengthen, regardless of where we are in our terms of our ability to be empathetic. It's something that with practice we can strengthen, because oftentimes we get in the habit of shutting down as a protective skill and turning away from empathy, and therefore turning away from that compassionate response. So yes, Tracy, I believe, I mean, I just, for example, just being in tune to each other's emotions is a skill set that's part of empathy. It's only one piece of it. Empathy is a complex skill that uses our frontal lobe, uses our limbic system, uses all of our brain. And
for sure. Now, you know what? Just to back it up a little bit, for those that don't know, like you said, a lot of this has to do with self-development. How can we describe the word empathy to somebody?
Well, empathy is again, there's different components to it, but it's the ability to experience what somebody else has experienced, or sort of being able to be there. At the same time, being able to differentiate our emotions from someone else's emotions. So it's not just, it's connecting on that emotional level. So it's partly perception taking, like, okay, I can see this from your point of view, but there's an emotional aspect. Perception taking is the, our frontal lobe. There's an emotional aspect to empathy, in which we're also connecting on that level. So it's being with somebody, being present for them, being able to take their perspective, being able to connect emotionally to them, it without judging, and at the same time being able to differentiate my emotion from your emotion.
Yeah.
So it encompasses all of that.
Yeah, that sounds like it can be complex, especially being able to distinguish the difference between what you're feeling and what the other person is feeling, especially if they're experiencing some trauma or something that, is making them feel a certain way, you
Right.
know. So, yeah, that's definitely something that is complex, but it is important for us to learn and to know. What are your suggestions for, or some things that we can do practically to be able to distinguish those differences?
Right. Well, one part is, and here's kind of the crux. Empathy makes us more vulnerable to compassion fatigue, but it also makes us more effective in our ability to help people to heal and grow. So we want to be able to be present. At the same time, I teach some different, maybe some habits and rituals that can help us to separate then when we're done with the work, so we can go home and deal with our own stuff. But so that's part of the skill set, is that the being present, being able to recognize when we step into judgment, so that we can step away from it. But just even simple things like that attunement, practicing. One of the things I do in trainings is, we practice just mirroring. There is a real connection between our ability to interpret each other's emotions and our facial expressions, because we use our face to express emotions very much, and so we also use it to connect with each other's emotions. So one of the mirroring techniques I have people practice, and I have kind of a funny story that I share in the book about this, is that when I first in trainings, years, I would do this exercise where I would pass out cards with different emotion words on them. And I would instruct participants in pairs to practice or take turns mirroring or expressing the emotion only using their facial expressions, not using words. And then their partner would then, they were instructed to mirror. In other words, they would use their facial muscles to mirror what they were seeing, and then try to guess what the feeling is. Well, what would happen, and people struggled with this, it was very difficult to distinguish, worry from fear, or there's so many different nuances and emotions that it's hard to distinguish the two, or distinguish them from each other. So I noticed people were struggling, and I thought that was the reason why. And then upon further observation, I noticed it's because people weren't doing the mirroring part. They were jumping right to the guessing. Again, you're using your frontal lobe, but you're not really engaging your limbic system in doing that. And so in order to make sure they followed my instructions better, I switched up the activity. And I started doing it as more of a circle activity, so like a large group. And we would go around and take turns. And as the participants would express the emotion, and then I would sort of monitor the activity and make sure that the other person mirrored it before they guessed. And to my surprise, they were guessing it correctly all the time, on the first shot every time. And I was like, this is interesting.
Okay.
And
so let's try it. Let's do an example. This is going to be kind of fun.
Okay. I don't know how this works on Zoom, by the way.
Oh, we can do it. I think we can do it.
I'm up.
Okay, I'll give my emotion and you can mirror it. So in other words, you're going to give back the same emotion that I'm having.
Yeah.
And then you can guess and I'll tell me if that's the emotion. Okay, let me think of an emotion besides excited, because recently excited and happy. Okay, let's see.
Okay, before I guess, I'm going to try that. Well, I don't know if this is the word, but what comes to mind is exasperated, or maybe a little frustrated, tired.
Yes. Awesome. So and that's a great activity to do. And I love that when you did an example of it.
But here's it. Well, and I had to, and here, that's the crazy thing. I'm not sure that's what I would have guessed if I hadn't done it first. And that's what I discovered in this activity. And there's a little science behind this. I am in no way claiming that my trainings are any sort of controlled science experiment. Sure. But I would do that. Like, I did that more than once. I actually switched up the activity and found it to be more successful. And sometimes when I had larger groups, then I started telling the participants about this, and I would divide it, and I'd have one group not just guess, and the other group mirror first and then guess. And inevitably, the group that mirrored first was better at interpreting the emotions. And it just, again, not a scientific experiment, but I think there is some science behind the idea that our facial expressions play a big role in being able to feel what the other person's feeling. And so that mirroring really allows us to be able to do it. And I'm not suggesting people go around and mimic each other's facial expressions, but just relax and naturally allow your face to mirror that expression, and you'll find you'll be able to connect a little more. I say put your face into it. When you're trying to be empathetic, put your face into it.
That's good. I like that. I'm gonna start using that. But I think that is very important. And thank you for sharing that tip with us, because it is important that we connect with one another, especially a lot of times where people are afraid to have eye contact with one another. Yeah. And especially now it's important because we're wearing masks all the time. So we're really not sure. And I love how people went out and they got masks. They have like smiley faces on them, So people, because what that says is, I understand how you feel, and I want to connect with you. So,
Absolutely. Faces are very important. And it's where it's as, just even as children seek safety in their caregiver's face. That's what they see. And that facial expression is what they seek safety. And we don't grow out of that need to connect with each other. And so it does really come into play now when we're all, we have that separation. We're using Zoom. It's why when I do trainings, online trainings, I try to, depending on the size of the training, at least at some point go, okay, cameras on. Okay, you've seen enough PowerPoint. Let's get the cameras on and talk about this and really connect face to face, because I think that's a really important part of connection. And there's a little bit of science behind that, that whole experience that I talked about, that I've experienced in my training. There's been a lot of research done on empathy and the ability to be able to interpret facial expressions, and the face really does matter. And I, if when people have impairments in the face or in their facial muscles, they struggle with that skill of being able to interpret facial expressions. And so, although my experience was not scientific, there was, I didn't have the control groups and stuff. There is some research that backs what I discovered in terms of how important that ability to be able to use our facial muscles, both to express emotions and to interpret them, is really important. Even people that have had injections, it temporarily struggle with that skill of being able to interpret emotions. Some studies have found evidence of that.
yes, I believe that's true. This just certainly looks like it on television. Well, hey, you got heard in here today. You got a couple of tips for free from Michelle Graff. And remember, she's the CEO of Cultivating Human Resiliency. So if you all need some training, you want to get her book, it is on Amazon.com. And what is it called? Say it with me, y'all. The Compassion Fatigued Organization. And what does she do best? She restores compassion. Well, she helps build resilience. That's the thing that she does best. So catch us next time for the next episode. Don't miss it.
Thank you, Traci.